Hey everyone, this is Quentin Figueroa here with Slayermint.com, and I wanted to talk to you about libertarian versus liberal versus conservative versus authoritarian. So these are common terms that we hear a lot, and we think that maybe liberals are into big government and conservatives are more conservative and then into small government. But that's actually not the case. If we look into it, it's just that they are into spending government money on different things. So let's explore these four different words and talk about it. And obviously this is coming from kind of an American perspective, because the word liberal has changed a lot in the past 100 years from the classical liberal term. And now in America, it has kind of a new meaning, and it's different than what it used to mean. So we'll kind of talk about that. So we have two main dichotomies when it comes to talking about these things. You have social issues, and then you have economic issues. And social issues would be things like welfare, immigration, social security, universal health care, things like that that involve more so people, social. And then you have kind of the economic side of things, which is more on business, on regulation, on taxes, and kind of more of a business economic side of things. And when you look at it, you have it to where liberals are basically into talking about social things. They care a lot about social and people. Conservatives, on the other hand, they care much more about economic things. They are into talking about business and taxes and regulation and, this kind of thing, the free market. So you have kind of the social and economic side of things, and in general you kind of have liberals and conservatives talking about this type of stuff. And then you have authoritarian, which is basically complete government control over both social and economic things. And then you have libertarian, which is very little to no government control over social and economic issues. And so basically you have liberals who want freedom socially, conservatives who want freedom economically, and then libertarians who want freedom socially and economically, and then you have authoritarians who basically don't want freedom socially or economically. And then now being into, say, if you're conservative and if you're into economic things, it doesn't mean necessarily that you don't want the government involved in social things, and vice versa for liberals. Just because they're into social things doesn't mean they don't want the government involved in economic things. So there's still government involvement being used in kind of both of these things. So for instance, if you take something like drugs, right? So drugs are, on the left, on kind of more the liberal stance, they are in favor of allowing people the freedom to use those drugs. And then you have the conservatives who are not in favor of that because it's more of a social thing, and they don't want people to have necessarily that freedom. So you have kind of this dichotomy between the two. And then you have libertarians who don't really care. So the libertarians don't want the government involved in the issue at all, which is different than liberals and conservatives. A liberal wants the government to basically say this is legal and say you are allowed to do this. The conservatives want the government to say you can't do this, this is not allowed. And then the libertarians want the government to say nothing. They just don't care what they don't want the government to be involved in whether or not you do drugs to begin with, and they want people to have the freedom without being told by the government you have the freedom. So libertarians are not in favor of the government telling you what you can or can't do in that regard. And then of course authoritarians want the government to tell you what to do. So another example would be universal health care, where liberals want the government to intervene and provide universal health coverage for everyone, where the conservatives do not want the government as much involved in universal health care. They want the government involved with kind of insurance companies and the way healthcare is handled in general, but they don't want universalized healthcare, which more the liberals want. And then another example would be regulation. Since regulation is an economic issue, you have conservatives that are more in favor of less regulation. I mean, they still want regulation, but not to the degree that the liberals want it. So the conservatives want more freedom in regards to regulation, where the liberals want less freedom in regards to it. So they're going to use more government to kind of maintain regulation, that kind of thing. And then of course libertarians do not care really one way or the other. They don't want government involvement with regulation. And then authoritarians want complete, kind of regulation and control over that kind of thing. And then you have immigration, and this is more of a social policy, but it's kind of economic in a way too. And in the economic sense, that's why kind of conservatives are less in favor of it, because immigration, if you have welfare systems and things like that, it could be kind of a tax burden, and it could be less economic in a way, and that's why conservatives are less in favor of it. Where socially, you have liberals that are more in favor of immigration because they care about social things and they care about people, and they want more people to come in, and they want people to be free and that kind of thing. So they want immigration. Libertarians in general do not care one way or the other about immigration. They think that borders should basically be open. But the difference in understanding that is, like, say in America 100 years ago, you did not have a welfare state or lots of social programs that you now have in America and a lot of other countries, like a lot of Western Europe, where people immigrate into. So 100 years ago, immigration wasn't something where people would come to take advantage of tax-paying benefits and things like this, where this day and age you kind of have that issue where when you have immigrants, you're paying for them and the native population is paying for that. And that's kind of where kind of more conservatives are into talking about that kind of thing. Libertarians generally don't care, but I mean, to the degree that they understand that it hurts the state, they kind of get that and do care in that regard. But if we didn't have a state and we didn't have social programs, it wouldn't matter, and libertarians wouldn't care. Conservatives still might care, who knows, and then liberals would still be, they'd want immigration, but there'd be less immigrants because immigrants are not necessarily coming for economic freedom, they're coming for other reasons entirely. So that's immigration. And then you have just in general taxes, and then taxes. So it's interesting because conservatives talk about not being in favor of taxes, but they just don't want taxes on social things. They don't want to pay taxes on welfare or social security or universal health care or things like this, where that's what the liberals want to pay taxes on because they care about social things. The conservatives, their biggest thing they want to pay taxes on is military, which is kind of a weird thing for them to be into. But that's kind of a conservative stance, is military. And that's kind of outside of economic pieces, but it's a conservative stance. But they want less taxes on things like, obviously social stuff, but they still want taxes to go towards some regulation, some business stuff and things. But in general, they want more freedom in business, and liberals want more freedom socially. And then libertarians, as far as taxes go, they don't really want taxes at all. They just want people to pay for what they need just individually without taxes. And then of course authoritarians are really into, it's complete control through taxation. So of course authoritarians need taxation. And of course it's not this clean cut. I mean, I'm kind of generalizing here because there are lots of kind of contradictions. Like, liberals are into social freedom, but they're not into kind of freedom to own a firearm, which is kind of a contradiction because that's kind of people. It's like, why can't people own a firearm? That's like people. If you can have an abortion, or if it's your choice to have, drugs, do drugs, and if it's your choice for certain things, why isn't it your choice to have a firearm? So that's kind of weird that liberals are not open to that. And then of course, conservatives, they're generally into economic freedom, but they still want to use the government to pay for military, which is kind of weird. And that's a huge expense economically, and there's a lot of waste that goes into that and those kind of things. So there's still kind of gray areas and whatnot, but in general, liberals want social freedom and conservatives want economic freedom. And libertarians, they want freedom both socially and economically. And then authoritarians, they do not want freedom neither socially or economically. So they want complete control. And that's basically how it breaks down. And then you kind of have of course, degrees in between all of this, and you have all these different kind of words and parties and things that kind of are various degrees in between complete control and no control and that kind of thing. So it varies. And in general, the more freedom you have, the less government you have. And the more government you have, the less freedom you have. So as people grow and mature, they usually favor more freedom, and in favoring more freedom, they usually become more libertarian. That's why you see kind of people that are older, they vote more conservative, because conservatives in general want to pay less taxes on things, and where liberals want to pay more taxes on things. Our biggest expenses at the federal level, tax-wise, are Social Security, which is a social liberal type program. The second one is Medicare and healthcare, which is again another social liberal type program. The third is military, which is a conservative spending. So of course they're into big spending too, but in general, as people mature, they become more libertarian, which is more into freedom in general, and they want less taxes and they want less government control over them. So of course they're going to favor kind of lower taxes and this kind of thing, because taxes is less freedom. It's basically more authoritarian and it's trying to control your life and tell you what to do. It's the same relationship with like a parent and a child. A child is under the control of the parent, and in this sense the parent is basically like the government kind of telling them what to do. And as the child grows and matures, they're able to kind of need less control by the parent. They can take care of themselves, and because of this they are now able to handle that freedom and less in favor of the parent / government. And it's the same thing with politics. It's the same thing with people. As they grow, they kind of favor less the government and they are more in favor of freedom. So hopefully that gives you a little bit of an understanding of these different words. I know they're kind of confusing and they can be used different ways, and there's really no definitive definition on them, but this is kind of one way to look at it, and hopefully it gives you some perspective on the thing. So thank you very much for listening, and please subscribe if you enjoy these videos. I will have many more for you. Comment if you disagree, and thank you very much for watching, and have a great day, everyone.